Yeah.
The Baba said some of my greatest lovers don't even know my name.
Yeah. Yeah. But this is actually a big theme here because he often says to them, you have the rare good fortune of having a Sadguru right before you. So take advantage of it. Create love. Don't waste this opportunity. That's a real urgent theme in these talks. So maybe next time we could get to be in the Prem Ashram. I mean, this must have been an extraordinary bunch of kids. It must have been great souls, all of them, to get into this. Yeah. Also, and this is more about this, that is why, okay, the light of the light globe is colorless and dazzling. What kind of light appears to them? The light of the light globe is colorless and dazzling. That is why those traveling without a guru stop here. Also, the spiritual pilgrim hears the Anand Nad. Nad means word, like if you were to say the word of God, it would be Nad. Or when you study music, the Anahata Nad, the unspoken word. And the Anand means bliss, of course. An unimaginable, wonderful nod or sound, such as we could have no idea of. So in the second sky, or the second part of the first sky, that's what you're starting to experience. And then on the third part of the first sky, for all practical purposes, can be thought of as the first sky proper, of which I think I should be playing, of which divisions A and B are, as it were, the outskirts. Here the spiritual traveler acquires the power of reading the minds of others. Also, he can see things far off. But remember this, whose minds can he read? Only of those who are in the ordinary gross world, and among these, only those who are physically near to him. This advancing soul in the third division of the first sky cannot even read the mind of a man in the first or second part of that same sky. And although he can see long distances, this sight extends to the gross world only. And with this we are finished with the first sky, Baba tells them. And now he goes on to the second one, and this is where heaven and hell are. And this little drawing is there. So here's good, bad, and this says svarg, which means heaven, and this is nark, which means hell or shit. Another use of it. And I don't entirely understand why the dot with a line and the circle. Does anyone have any ideas?
Well, the dot, wouldn't that be the plane, and the circle is the sky?
Probably would be. Yeah, that's probably right, actually. Yeah. So now this is a bit different because these two skies are where ordinary gross conscious people go when they die. But people who are in the second plane can, see them there. So now it should. By the way, this. What is the date of this? Yes, by this time, they were out, there was a rain shower and all the boys were outside in the open. By this time, Baba had moved to the crypt, what is now his samadhi, and was talking out the window. So the boys would all have been gathered. You know that space there right outside? If you're going into the samadhi, the window on the right-hand side is where Baba was. And that space out there, but between there and the Sabha Mandap is where the boys would have been gathered at this time. So now we hear a little bit about heaven and hell. The sky associated with the second plane, as we say, has two parts, known as heaven, svarg, and hell, nark. Now those who die bring with them their sanskaras. Baba had explained sanskaras a few talks earlier, good and bad. If the good exceed the bad, one goes to heaven. And if the bad outweigh the good, one goes to hell. For wrapping up the heaven and hell experience and returning to the world again, a certain relative proportion of good and bad sanskaras has been fixed. Now, I've never heard that before.
No.
So I guess it has to come to a certain proportion. You know, if I've lived a terrible life, and I have my bad sanskaras like this, and my good like that, by suffering in hell, they balance and balance and balance. And I guess there's a certain proportion. Do you know what it is, Ira? Do you know the number? We need a number.
40-60.
40-60. That's kind of what I would
He
think.
does
actually.
mention that in the discourse.
Huh?
He mentions that in the discourse.
A proportion?
He doesn't talk about being fixed, he talks about being balanced.
Yeah, reaching a
Balance.
balance.
Yeah.
But here
Not
apparently,
quite balanced.
yeah, not quite. And here I guess there's a number.
Ah,
So we got to get the number here.
And it's interesting that both the good and the bad, so if you've got too many good sanskaras, it still has to balance out before you can come back to continue the...
Yeah, that's right.
Interesting.
well, they get spent by pleasant experiences in heaven.
Yeah, that's right. By blissing it out, you get rid of all your good sanskaras.
Maybe they're not good. Maybe they're not good experience. Maybe it's bad experience to balance it.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
actually, there's a
That's
talk
right.
Baba gave in
No,
November, which is not for the boys but for the Mandali, on this subject of heaven and hell. And this sounds kind of good to me. He said that if you've had good and bad, if you're more on the good side than the bad side, you experience the bad sanskaras first, the hell state first, and then you get to bliss out. And he said that the bliss lasts for a long, long time. But there are some spiritual aspirants who don't want the heaven state because they feel it's a waste of time and a distraction. And Baba says it actually doesn't do you any good at all. It's just like a vacation, you know, and you have to come back after it. So some people don't want to, they avoided the heaven also. And he also said that people who are overwhelmingly have bad sanskaras, they experience the hell state very intensely and are reincarnated quickly. Whereas people who have good sanskaras, it lasts for a long time, so it's a long time between incarnations. So I've never heard that
That's
before.
it, I'm off.
You're off.
I'll get some pets and scars and sweep up.
Yeah, you might not come back until
Yeah.
50 years after Baba's left again. Oh no, I didn't want to, I shouldn't have stayed in heaven. I knew it was a mistake.
God.
Yeah. If death, good and bad sanskaras equal each other, and this never happens, one has to take birth again at once. But if the good predominate, off to heaven does he go. And after experiencing and enjoying the additional excess of good sanskaras, he takes rebirth. Similarly, if the bad sanskaras predominate over the good, he experiences a sojourn in hell. And after experiencing and finishing off the surplus bad sanskaras, he too is reborn. The one who descends from heaven wins a good birth, while bad rebirth becomes the lot of one returning from hell. As we say, a certain ratio of good and bad sanskaras has been determined for taking birth again. But there is always an imbalance of good or bad sanskaras, one way or the other, and the surfeit has to be experienced and burned off before one arrives at the fixed proportion requisite for taking rebirth. Sounds like this fixed proportion is really a spiritual law. Now he says more about what these...
Sounds like you don't really get a choice to say no to heaven. No, I don't want to go to heaven, too bad.
A couple of angels just drag you off, and you can't avoid it. Now bear in mind 2 points. First, here in the second sky, in heaven or hell, one has a subtle body, but, and this is the second point, without the gross form you can't realize God. So necessarily you have to come back to the gross world to assume another gross body. So
And
the
that's-
idea that you're going to go to heaven and have bliss and be with God forever, it can't happen for this reason.
And that's interesting then, that distinguish between the plane and
Yeah.
the sky. You know, that heaven and hell is the sky.
Right.
And that's why if you're on the second plane,
Yeah.
going there, you know, you
Right.
get stuck there because it's not.
Yeah.
Mm.
While in heaven, one enjoys bliss but cannot see God. But what an enjoyment! You can imagine, I mean, Baba would really, you know, it's like, oh, it's so, because he experiences what those people are experiencing. It is beyond description, and by the same token, the suffering one undergoes in hell cannot be told in words. So then let us pause for a moment and reflect on the enjoyment in hell. We have heaven. We'll get to hell in a minute. I'm sort of jumping onto my personal.
He wants to skip over, he didn't want to talk about it.
Well, I'm just being realistic about where I'm going. In that state, whatever one desires, one gets. But the experience varies according to one's sanskaras. Suppose one was fond of singing during one's life in this world. In heaven after death, if he desires singing, he hears it, but singing of real quality. None of this Baba's samadhi, spiritual training kind of singing where you get spiritual training from having to sit there. So too with regard to meals and food and drink. I wouldn't have imagined this. If he wishes to eat malido, this is a kind of an Indian sweetmeat, a Zoroastrian sweetmeat there. He enjoys malida such as he has never tasted before. If drink is what he wants, the drink he gets is surpassingly delicious.
Wow.
But the fun of it all is that the desires that arise do so according to the sanskaras he has acquired. That is, in accordance with the special tastes he cultivated during his past life. I somehow wouldn't have thought of food and drink. I guess I should have taken, you know, what Christians and Muslims say more seriously. It always sounds pretty good the way they describe it.
That's big, you want to have all these food shows on TV.
Yeah.
That's really food heaven.
Now in hell, quite the opposite. The case is quite the opposite. If he desires sweetmeats, instead he gets quite the opposite. Refuse. Nark means shit. Excrement. And likewise with respect to the other things he wants. The acuteness and severity of the sufferings he has to undergo defy description. But remember one important point. The experiences of both heaven and hell, svarg and inak, are nothing but dreams. Just as if you fall asleep, a dream comes, and in a dream you experience good and bad events, such as a motor car ride that brings you pleasure until all of a sudden you find yourself confronted with a terrifying giant. So Lorraine, this is different from your case where it's a tiger. This is a different category. But then upon awakening, you know it was all just a dream. In the same way, in realization, you know that all this that you have experienced was a dream. Okay.
Yes, as long as one is sleeping, the dream is real.
Yes, that's right.
So
So,
you can tell yourself it's a dream as much as you like.
right, so the people who are in heaven and hell, it's totally real to them. Padma Maharaj said that these descriptions of hell states, and Hinduism has it too, he said they're quite real. I mean, the people go through these things. They experience them.
Yes,
But,
that's
yeah. But they're actually just dreams, as Baba is saying here. But now all this is different from a person who's actually on the second plane, which he says here. As I was usually, the soul who has ascended to the second plane through spiritual advancement, as against those who experience the heaven and hell states after their physical death, he too necessarily sees these two parts of that sky, heaven and hell. But the difference is that he takes the experience of heaven and hell while still in the gross body, as contrasted with the ordinary human after death, who does so through the subtle body. Indeed, the state of the second plane pilgrim contrasts even with that of an advanced pilgrim in the second sky. Thus, the second plane pilgrim experiences heaven and hell even while living in the gross body. Okay. So this is the second plane with its two parts.
Much of an incentive, is it?
Hmm?
It's not much of
Not a
an
great
incentive.
So now he goes on, I'll do a little more of these planes. I mean, I've never seen anything quite like this before, you know, this count of arrows. Okay. So now Baba is recapitulating. This is the 31st of December. It was the next day that things went wild at Nirvana.
Yeah. So at this stage, and in consequence, he stops at this stage. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then basically just has to die and come back and start again.
Yeah. Yeah, if you get entrapped in it, entrapped in these experiences. That, I think for people traveling without a master, that's usually what happens. You're constantly getting stuck. I don't know, Baba never used this language in talking about the musts, but it sounds like those
Totally.
were people who were trapped in the skies. Because getting out of them is almost impossible.
Oh, he did mention that sometimes they get fascinated by certain objects. And,
Yeah,
they can't pull themselves away from it.
yes. We saw that with Muhammad. I remember when he was into Dish. He seemed to be less absorbed later, but do you guys remember that story?
Yeah.
And he would just sort of
Yeah.
like this, and he would do it for hours. And then he would stare at something. Or else, I remember there was some sort of a pot, and he just stared, and finally there's a little black dot on it. And he was completely absorbed in that.
What does marg mean, further in the planes, marg?
Path. It's a word for path, or spiritual. The three margs, the three yogas, the three paths. Now, a pilgrim in the second plane sees heaven and hell and can experience them even while in his gross body. If he does not have a Sadguru guiding his progress, he enjoys them, heaven in particular, since no one can go to hell voluntarily. And
There goes your plans.
you get dragged. Well, they'll tell you devils to help out. They just drag you there when the time is right. And in consequence, he stops at this stage without proceeding further, which is what you're saying, in the planes mark. So if you're traveling without a guru and you get to the second plane, you get all absorbed in heaven and you're entranced, even though you're in the body and you're stuck there. You don't go on. In this way, the powers of seeing heaven and hell prove a check for him in his advancement. But if he has a Sadguru, the Sadguru allows him to see only to see with his eyes. He doesn't permit the sadhak as a desirer to experience and enjoy what he sees. Upabhag, this word upabhag is upabhag, lavadeto, nati. You know, did any of you ever read the Divine Comedy by Dante? It makes me think of this because he's always being taken with a guide and he gets to see everything, but never actually immerses himself in any of it. So maybe there's an echo of what he's talking about here. Now, returning to the third sky, here as in the case of the first sky, we find three divisions as depicted in figure 30 below. Their designations are Indrapad, or Makam e Huri. You know the Huris? Heard about the Islamic Huris? That's the word. The office of Indra, or the station of the Huris. Makam e Kudsi, the station of purity. And Antar Gyan, or inner knowledge. Antar, that's related to our word inner, etymologically. And Gyan is the word for knowledge, the path of Gyan. So those are the three. Now you're getting into pretty exalted stuff when you get up to the third plane. You know, I would presume that if you're on the third plane and if you die, heaven and hell no longer pertain to you, because that's way down on the second plane. I don't know what you do when you die on the third plane. Now remember, people of the world, when they leave their bodies, go either to Svarg or Nark, heaven or hell, according to their sanskaras. And after experiencing their pop or punya, I don't know if you know those words, pop and punya. Pop is sin, virtue or vice. Yeah. As the case may be, they return to the world again. Such persons after death can ascend only to the second sky for the heaven or hell experience and no further. Actually, God Speaks, Baba says that in the supplement, that you experience the heaven or hell states through your astral body. And at the end of that experience, when you're about to take birth, you drop your astral body and then get a new one for your next.
And that's sub-subtle body.
Yeah. He hadn't explained that point this early. And yet there's an exception to this rule. Those few who practice special tap jap, do you know tap jap? Jap is chanting the name of God. Krishna, Hare Krishna, like that, or you could do it with Baba's name. And tap means austerities. This in the old Hindu accounts. These rishis practiced tap jap for 10,000 years. And then you bother them and they put a curse on you, and all sorts of colorful stories about this. And riyazat, that is to say abstinence, meditation, concentration, etc., for the attainment of the state, the third plane. Such persons, after leaving their body, go to the first part of the first sky. This first initiative, I don't know why it's first sky, I have to check to make sure that's correct.
First part of the
Must be
Yeah,
third.
third.
Must be third.
The second.
Because here it says that there, this must be, I must have just put the wrong word down. This first part of the third sky, as we say, bears the designation of Indrapad, or the station of Indra. Do you know Indra? In a lot of the Vedas and the Puranas, he's the king of the gods. Nonetheless, he's lower than Brahma, Vishnu, Mahesh. He's a lower tier of gods than that. Naturally, they make their way into the sky in their subtle bodies, not in the gross body. Here they remain for one entire cycle of yugas, a vast expanse of years. You know the 4 yugas? According to the numbers you get in Hinduism, I think a cycle, it's a kalpa, and I think it's 4 million years, something like that. I don't know whether to believe these numbers or not, but it's a long time. And then return to the world where they have to take birth again. Here in Indrapad, the bliss, Anand, is millions of times more intense than that experienced in Svarg, heaven. But when at last one attains to the goal, which is realization, even this exalted station appears as a dream to him. Fact! I love it. You can really see Baba. Now, the advanced pilgrim on the third plane can see and experience all 3 parts of the first plane. That is, the 3 subdivisions of the sky, even while inhabiting and incarnating gross body. For those who venture without a guru, the third plane and its associated sky constitute a more dangerous ground even than did the second plane, for the chances of a fall are greater. Baba does talk about falls from the lower planes. I get the impression that it can happen in this Yoga Varashta thing. You don't stone state, you kind of have a severe setback and have to do it over. And probably if you're on the planes, it seems like an unmitigated catastrophe, because the journey seems so enormously long, I imagine. Never having done it, of course. For the one traveling with the guru, of course, incurs no such risk, since the guru would not allow him actually to experience these planes and their paraphernalia but merely to see them. So this apparently is the difference. You know, you're wanting to go and the group, hold your horses.
You
You're like a
stay-
dog on a
You
leash.
stay on the train. You can look out the window.
That's right, you can look out the
Yes.
That's
window.
as far as you're going to go.
But you want to go out into the bazaar? No way.
That's great.
What comes next? We have reached the second part of this third sky, which bears the Persian name Makame Qudsi. Qudsi is one of the 101 names of God. It's one of them, or 99 in some. In this sky are Asma and Abide, celestial souls, divine spirits. Now, I don't quite know what the difference is between these celestial spirits and Indrapad, because that sounds like a celestial spirit to me also. So we need to clarify this crucial point. They have subtle bodies that never take gross form. They are also known as angels, and their abode is as Farishte Devlok. If we had Persians here, the word Farishte, it's a common name actually, a woman's name, and it's their term for angels, in Arabic actually. They secure a chance of descending and coming down to this world only after 4 cycles or yugas. They enjoy the greatest happiness, yet still they crave for a body. So these are these celestial spirits up in this second part of the third plane. And this, the last subdivision, is the state known as Antargyan, or inner knowledge, which constitutes the third part of the third sky, and which is practically the same as the third plane proper. On the third plane, through the experience of this Antargyan, or inner knowledge, what can one do? That chap on the first plane that we were speaking about earlier can read the minds of others near him. But the adept of the third plane can read the minds of all, wherever they are located and whenever he likes, even the minds of those far off. Let's see. Far off. The chap, I loved about it the way you used chap, this chap. Because,
Very English.
he's God in human form, and like to me, oh, you're on the third plane. It's about this, just a chap. This chap on the first plane can read the minds of ordinary worldly people, but this fellow on the third plane can see everyone, even those on the first and second planes, in the 3 parts of the third sky. Though the fourth plane and the minds of those on it are beyond his field of vision. The first plane chap can see any part of the gross world, but the third planer can see the subtle world as well. Now let's see, he'll come into the, he has a lot to say about the fourth plane. And he says, recall the simile given on an earlier day of a fast-moving motor car. This is the analogy he gave. He said, on the fourth plane, whatever on earth this means, the path has a sharp bend. And he gives the analogy of driving a car, and if you're going too fast, you go off. You're tumbling off. And I don't know what it means to say the fourth plane has a sharp bend, but maybe when you get to the fourth plane, you see it. Whatever terms that means to someone located there. And also on the fourth plane, he said the plane and the sky are very close to each other. He gave the analogy of Lonavala. Some of you, if you've been to Meherabad, you've been through Lonavala, whether you knew it or not. But it's right in the mountains there. So it's a good figure for the fourth plane, because it's a big fall. And apparently the station, railway station in the city of Lonavala back then were quite close. So quotes Hafiz here. Let's see. I'm thinking, since we don't have much time, jump. Oh, I wanted to read. Where was this? he gave a, sorry, I really do want to find some other thing. Did I read this? Yeah, here's the hooky. What is this about? Yeah, okay. Here are some of the statements he was making with them. Yeah. Where did I read this? Did we read this?
No,
we
we
haven't. Before opening his lecture, Sri repeated what he said yesterday, that he has sworn to make some 10 or 20 or 25 or 30 boys. To make, he used the word to make, means to make them, God realized. The
And then
boys
bring
luck-
them back.
Yeah, probably to bring them back to creation consciousness. He kept sort of saying that,
I sort of got from that he was saying bring them back down to this.
yeah, I think you're
consciousness.
right in his use of the word make. Make them, thus, whatever that means, creation conscious, and they would be special instruments for his work, not circle members, an outside category for special work. The boys' luck is so good, and they're having come into such close proximity with the realized Sadguru. The great yogis, he continued, have been clamoring for years to see and become one with God. Some have been observing fast for over a decade. Some have been hanging upside down for years together. Yet God does not go to them. I do not go to them. There are yogis even now whose eyebrows reach down and extend even to their mouths. I can see all of them, right? Baba actually is God and you can see them. But for all they have undergone, still they don't find me. Yet some among you boys will see me as these yogis have not done. So love me. So another one of these injunctions. And here's I want to find the one where he talks about avatar. Let's see. I may have to actually go so far as to look through my notes for this. I'm not forgetting where it is. Gee, I'm not having trouble even though it's not so long ago. Yeah, now this was that day where the 1st of January, this tremendous explosion of love happened. And he just covered the 5th plane. Okay, I'll read a little bit about this. The 5th plane chap who never uses his powers. Let's see. He says, can do all that an advanced adept of the 4th plane can do, but he never does it. He never uses his powers. Not one such example has ever been known to occur. So here he actually says 5th plane people can do miracles, but they don't. Why not? Let us see. This fellow we are speaking of knows God, and he knows full well that all that happens does so in accordance with the law of God. So he never tries to change, interfere with, or influence God's work. He never raises the dead, or the power for this indeed he has, but he never uses it. Only a Sadguru can break the law of God, since he is one with God, who is the law maker. Jesus, Shams, that's Shamsi Tabriz, the master of Lumi, and others raised the dead. They didn't fall as a result of doing so because they were one with God. In short, only the advanced pilgrim on the 4th plane and God himself as the Sadguru can do miracles. But the difference between the two, all right, now he's talking about the difference between Sadhguru, the miracles of the Sadhguru and the miracles of the fourth plane thing. Now the time is up. The subject of the sixth plane will be taken up tomorrow. In the meanwhile, let me give you a few words of advice, my dear boys. I am satisfied with this state of yours. This constant crying and intense feeling of yours shows love, and this love must be increased. Remember, this is the day where all day long it had been weeping and wailing, Meher Ashram. But when I order you to stop it, you must do so. Increase love, but also obey orders. Don't check your Prem, let it grow, but obey orders. Those who preserve and endure, tiko, that's a Marathi word, to the last in this Prem, will win my grace, which means that I will make them realize me. This I have sworn. The accomplishment of this is the work of just a short period. It will not hang on and drag out through the course of life. Once the hooky is created, your work will be done in a second. I have these powers. There is no doubt about that. So for the next couple days after this, that scene at Mehrabad continued, and then gradually it diminished for the mass of the boys. A few of them were out of it from then on. I know that's a whole different story. Now let's see. Let's see next. Read more about the different skies, the hollow of our feet. Yeah, now this is a really strange part of this. I'll just look a little bit at it. Rababa is talking about the planes in the skies. And unfortunately, the manuscript here has these lacunae, these gaps, and the words are missing. And there's no way I can really know what the words should be. But he's comparing the human body as a microcosm, as a representation of the divine theme. And so the 5 toes correspond to the journey of evolution from stone and the little toe up to human being on the thumb toe, as they call it there. And then the ankle corresponds to the first plane, and the knee to the second. And the third is just plain missing. But I think it must be the hip. He makes the point that these are bones. He says that we're talking about bones here. So it sounds like joints. And the fourth plane seems like it's around the shoulder somewhere. And the fifth, somewhere around the Adam's apple. And the sixth plane is there at the point of the third eye. And the seventh plane is the crown of the head. These are the planes. But then the skies or asmans correspond to hollows, he says. And I just haven't been able to work this out. I spent 2 hours on the phone with Bob Ahrens, who's a doctor, see if he could help me with it, and it was just hard to crack. But the first one is clear. The ankle is the plane, and the hollow at the sole of the feet is the first sky. And the fourth, it could be like the shoulder joint and the armpit. It could be that. The knee, the only thing about is that he says that the hollow is, it's all in a vertical line, and the hollow is beneath the plane. So this part is not beneath that. So I don't quite know what that would be. And if it's the hip, we weren't able to figure that out either. But the fifth plane, the plane is here, and the hollow seems to be a cavity in the bones here. And at the sixth plane, they're almost merged with each other. In the seventh plane, there's no such distinction at all. So here we have the human body actually has this cosmological significance. The whole spiritual path is represented there. And a couple points where Baba says, I'm giving you the exact points where these things are. But these slothful Mandali didn't videotape it. I mean, I'd love to see it, you know, what these actual were. So he's giving them all this kind of, and this is right in the middle of this love, you know, avalanche going on. Look at the stuff he was telling these kids. He's saying the point of all of this, okay, I'll read this, and if we have a good interpreter, someone can finally give us an interpretation of this. So the sixth sky or asman is extremely close to the plane, as are the corresponding body parts. The forehead representing the sky, and the point between the eyebrows representing the plane. Remember, all these points of the body are exactly as I have indicated here. But here is obviously not the manuscript where the words are missing all over the place. All of this has been given by way of introduction. Now we come to the analogy itself. And he's been saying for 2 or 3 days, I want to give you this analogy. And all of this is preparatory to it. How that would be, I cannot imagine. But here's the analogy. Picture a palace. It has a single door, no windows. It stands on 3 pillars. It has 7 walls, one of iron, another of zinc, a third of silver, a fourth of gold, a fifth of stone, a sixth of wood, and a seventh of pearls. In front of the palace extends a compound with 3 ponds, one filled with water, one with milk, and one with rose water. Moving out from the compound, there runs a lane. 7 tigers guard this lane. At the far end of the lane, there blooms a garden full of sweet-smelling flowers. Surrounding each bunch of flowers is a mandap. It's kind of like a sort of a pavilion where you might have a wedding or something like that. Within each bunch of flowers is a snake. When you emerge from the garden, there opens before you a desert. After crossing the desert, you arrive at a river. On the far side of the river arises a great city. And with this, our analogy is finished. Simple, right? I'd love to know what it means. Anybody have any thoughts on it?
Could the desert be that gap between the 6th and the 7th plane, like the great city of the 7th plane?
Yeah, there are one basic way of reading this is that the city is like the 7th plane, and the other is the city of the world, and the palace is
The 7 planes.
the innermost chamber would be where God is. So I don't know. Different people have said things like that.
Because it's got no windows in the palace.
Huh?
It's got no windows, which is the curious thing, isn't it? The palace.
Well, I suppose once you're there, the outside no longer is there for you or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
There's a little more here. With this introduction and extended analogy, the whole of Vedanta is intellectually opened up for the one who is made to understand it. This analogy has never been given before, Baba says. Adding one last detail to the analogy, in that palace which I have referred to is seated a king. Now that's beginning to sound like a Sadguru, or the throne of God at the center of things, to me, I suppose.
Yeah, that would be good.
Yeah.
Hi.
These things, but then we have the 3 pillars. It stands on 3 pillars. I mean, I suppose you could also say knowledge, power, bliss if you wanted. I don't know. 7 walls. But what about iron, zinc, silver, gold, stone, wood, and pearls. That's an odd list, isn't it? Wood?
In that order it is, yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if that's a descending order or ascending order, or maybe there's no
It's
hierarchy
all
at
over the
all.
place.
One thing I do notice is that in Chinese cosmology, the four elements are earth, water, air, and wood. I think. Oh, metal, there are five. Metal is there, and wood is one of them.
Mhm.
So, and there's no fire in the Chinese system. So,
Lord,
yeah.
going back to the labeling of the joints that
Yeah.
correspond, has anyone thought of or correlated the bones and joints that Baba broke in the two car accidents to those?
Anyone would mean me.
Hmm.
Basically, hardly anybody else has
That's
ever
right.
looked at this.
So-
No, I didn't think of that. The hips, yeah, and the other bones. He broke other bones.
Mhm.
Yeah, he does say when he's going over these things, he says something about bones. I'm talking about bones here.
Hmm.
So it seems that the skeletal system is what he's talking about, is mirroring the planes. By the way, I didn't say this, but he says about the fourth plane when he comes to it. It's unclear, but I came to the conclusion that the fourth plane is probably the joint, and the fourth plane is skies are probably the armpit. He does say armpit in one place, but he says there are 7 siddhis, or 7 powers, and those correspond, actually, and I usually hear 8 when I read yogic stuff, but those correspond to the elbow, the wrist, and the 5 fingers. And he said that from the tips of the fingers, there's nothing. So if you fall down to your little toe, which is stone. That's why if you abuse fourth plane powers, you go right back to the beginning to stone form. So the human body is really a very direct image of the cosmos. There are many places where Baba has said things indicating that this is so, but it's hard to put it all together from the account he has given. I think what we're going to get is we're going to get the Ibn Arabis, who will come along and say, piece of cake, and he'll just explain the whole thing. Oh, it will all make sense. Or maybe we'll crack it sooner than that, I don't know.
Any idea of publication date, or what are you trying to shoot for or anything?
I'm not trying to shoot for anything, I'm just trying to do the work properly. I've done most of the basic editing, and that entails working with all these manuscripts. But now it's a question of these other talks from November, and also I'm kind of thinking the book ought to have a section that gives a history of the period, because if you don't know that, I've been explaining it, but if you just read these talks on their own, man, you wouldn't know what was going on.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable
Yeah,
what was going on. Yeah. And here he says, these things that I have told you have never before been revealed by any among the saints. Now they are being revealed to you because the time is fast approaching. This is almost the end. Now I'll just say this about he has a lot more about the planes and the kinds of knowledge you have on them. Darn, where is here? I really do want to find where he said about the avatar. I'm going to find that. Sorry. Just because it's so interesting. And I have a way. Oops, the last one. Okay, yeah, here it is. I think it's here. Okay, yeah, I thought it was there. I didn't see it when I was at that point. 29th. We did the second one. No, it isn't there. I'm sorry, I was just not finding it. He said this is the avatar, this is the time of the avatar. He does say that in one of these places. And just at the moment, I'm not finding it, sorry. But at the last two talks, he gives a very unusual description of the planes in a completely different way. He's talking about, again, this pran thing, prananakash, is a big theme. Baba didn't explain it once the Westerners came into the picture. He didn't try to explain it again, but it's a big part of the story. But he's talking about pran, or movement. It's more than just, it seems to be more than just pran as people talk about it nowadays. It seems to be primordial movement in all its manifestations, of which one would be the pran that you experience in the subtle planes. But he says on the sixth plane, the pran is completely motionless and still. On the fifth plane, the vibration is sounded. And on the fourth plane, and it's a little bit hard to know quite what it means. The text is a bit garbled there. But it sounds like it's at the head of a huge waterfall. And someone who's on the fourth plane has his back to the waterfall and doesn't know it. But then the third plane, the water flows over the lip. The lip of it is the three heavens, the three parts of the third plane. Remember that? One is where the water is going starting to fall. The second is where it's free fall. And the third is towards the bottom, where it's starting to burst into explosion of drops. So those are the three parts of the third plane. And the second plane is a pool at the bottom, and then it flows on down. So it sounds like there's a constant downward flow of pran, right from the sixth plane, all the way down into the gross world. Again, that's something I've never heard anything like that before. So it's 4 o'clock. Any last points or questions before we break it up? This is just little snippets we've been looking at. You can see, although it's not all that long, there is a lot there. There really, really is. It's also been the hardest editing I've ever done, because the text is not exact in the way it's written, so it's very hard to know precisely what is meant at a lot of points. I've never had that problem before. I always knew what it meant. There are other issues, but this has been very hard to actually understand it sometimes. So it's been quite a hard job, and still is. Any questions or comments?
Is there any way we can see that last paragraph, or somebody could copy that last paragraph?
Paragraph
Take a
of,
photo with your phone.
That stuff where you had avatar in yellow throughout, what was that?
yeah, that was the Word file. I was looking for the place. I'm just
Oh, I see.
frustrated at myself because I know it's right here, and I'll find it immediately as soon as it's over. But it's one of the first places where Baba gave a clear indication that he was the avatar. In fact, it's the earliest that I know of. He basically told these kids that he was the avatar, instead of just saying Sadhguru, as he always had in other places. He was really, there's a lot more stuff that he says to
Do you
them.
know
I mean,
which
he
one
was
I'm talking
really
about?
opening the doors to them.
Palace.
Yeah,
Hmm?
that's what I want.
They-
Oh, the palace, the analogy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what I want a copy.
Yeah.
But you have it on your phone?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, you want the thing about the palace?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because you're now way away from it. I don't know where we are right now.
Yeah. No, I know where it is.
Yeah, it's very
Yeah.
Because I want to study it and see if I can figure it out.
Well, if you could, it looks
fun, isn't
totally,
it?
yeah, I know, it's very fascinating. Okay, well, there's some snippets, some sips from these amazing talks which Baba gave, the like of which I've never seen, actually. There's something quite unique in this Advent. So, Jeva. With tigers. Because Lorraine wanted to know the significance of tigers, and Bob explained it to the boys. He actually gave this analogy. He's talking about, he's just explained to them about samskaras. And so, here we have him saying, Atma, in human form, has infinite knowledge of ignorance. Now, to know this infinite knowledge, infinite knowing must remain, but ignorance must vanish. But the sanskaras that Atma acquired in its previous forms force it, the poor thing, to know ignorance. Isn't that cute? So sometimes he'll say, this chap on the sixth plane, those were a chap, sixth plane. So for ignorance to vanish, the sanskaras must vanish too. But sanskaras cannot be made to vanish easily, since they are created through the very acts of seeing, hearing, and so forth, as we have explained before. Now this is in third person, whoever writing, speaking. To illustrate the problem, Shri gave the simile of a man who, in a dream, imagines that he is enjoying a pleasant drive in a motor car. It was fun in those days, If you had a car, you were rich and you could drive around the villages. And, it was cool. When in reality, nothing of the kind is taking place. Then how to free him from this pleasant dream delusion? This can be accomplished only through the sudden appearance of a tiger who terrifies the dreaming man and jolts him back to wakefulness. And then he goes on to explain this. So then what is the remedy to the problem of ignorance and sanskaras? We have been describing it. The sanskaras must be reversed, which means that the man, the Atma in human form, having descended to ignorance, must travel in traverse the reverse direction from ignorance to God, who is knowledge. And for the accomplishment of that purpose, he must get hold of a Sadguru. So actually, he explains in other places, the tiger is the Sadguru. Sometimes he's given this analogy several times, and sometimes he'll use the figure of a dragon or a snake or a raksha, like that. And this particular one comes to us in Baba's own handwriting. Get that? This appeared in the middle of a manuscript, it looks like Baba's handwriting to me. Anyway, maybe Chanji or whoever had the manuscript had this too and interleafed it. So this is on that very topic. It says, the Sadguru does this by pushing one on the reverse path, which produces reverse sanskaras. And these reverse sanskaras counterbalance the gross sanskaras by and by, and finally leading one to God. And dreams make you sleep
Good dream?
Good
comfortably.
dreams.
To make you awake, a tiger must come. When once awake, the tiger also disappears, and you become awake. So isn't that cool? I think in Baba's own handwriting. So there's your tiger, Lorraine, right in Baba's own handwriting. There's another slip like that in Baba's handwriting. So let's see. I'll show you some other. I'm just dipping into little passages here and there. So Baba, let me see. Which talk is this? Is that? Is that talk 3? No. So here, he's explaining about bubbles and waves and bubbles, and that's kind of a big topic here. Each wave bubble is equivalent to a world. And these worlds, like the waves that gave rise to them, are incalculable in number. Of these innumerable worlds, only 7 are inhabited. It is in table 1 below. So he has a lot to say about these 7 worlds. I'm going to jump over it because it gets to be a complicated topic. Then he, here he says, let's see. And then he starts talking about these light globes, which are another big topic here. He seems to correlate them with waves. And he says, now, when out of millions of the masses of humanity, one turns himself around so that now he faces the Creator with his back towards the world, he sees these innumerable lights in their true natural brilliance, beauty, and splendor, such as he had never seen before, as long as his face was toward the world and his back to God. These lights come into his view only after he crosses beyond the stage of Shariat. Remember that? We were talking, the second talk talked about the Shariat, the Tariqat, the Marifat, and Hakikat, and enters into the Tariqat. Not only can he now behold these lights in their full brilliance, beauty, and splendor, but he becomes lost in bewilderment as his eyes are more and more attracted and drawn in and fixated on them, as if never to be removed. This fixed gazing enables him to see in these very lights the true form of Paramatma, which is the form of the Sadguru. At this stage, when he thinks of any particular avatar, prophet, or realized master, he can see him, since all these avatars, prophets, and realized masters are Sadgurus. That was the word Baba used there. Thus, if such an individual thinks of Muhammad, he can actually see the real form, Swarup, of the great prophet of Islam. If his mind turns to Christ, he can see the great savior of mankind in his true form, and so on. In short, he can see the true form of whomsoever, whichever Sadguru, he thinks of in his mind at the time of such seeing. Here, Shri gave the example of his own having seen Hazrat Babajan in the real Paramatma Svarup, when in his higher state, and then again in the same actual form when he came down to the earth plane. So the way this sound is described, it sounds like when you enter, of course this is Baba on the 7th plane or wherever he saw that, but it sounds like when you enter into the path, cross the threshold into the first plane, these light globes become visible to you. He said elsewhere that scientists could never see these things, but some of them, even on the first plane, actually can. When one begins to see the real form of the Sadguru, he sees nothing else but this only. The real nur, nur is Arabic for light, the real luster of the Sadguru's form. And mind you, this is no illusion, no bhas, no false form or dream. It is indeed the clear form of the Sadguru. All of this is said to be the first stage. This is right at the beginning of the spiritual path. So, never happened to me. I've got ways to go. Let's see. Okay, I'll read to the end of this. So this is one of the very early talks. But now remember, these stages, which is to say the planes, have nothing to do with the members of the circle of a realized master or sadguru. They come to those of a realized master's outer circle, as also to those who are ardent desirers of God, that is, radhavs, or wayfarers. By the way, you know the book, The Wayfarers? I think that's probably Duncan's English translation of this word, rarav. Remember also that God is everywhere, in the light and the shadow, everywhere, and that the middle path of the plains is the real path. All other paths lead to states and places nowhere nearer to God than where we already are in the darkness. Do you want to hear about the solar system? You probably
We probably should hear
You
that.
probably should hear about it. Probably not something that you came burning to know about, but I predict, unless you've read a version of this somewhere, that you've never heard anything like this before. Let's see. Let's see where it is. Yeah. Well, where's the best place to start? Let's see. Okay, so he's just finished telling them about evolution. Okay, now that Sanskaras.
You're going to include some pictures of the doll upside down?
You know, I really, no joke, I really wish I could see that because there are very big questions about evolution in Baba's account. If you could just see what he did with it all, they'd be answered.
Yes.
But they wrote it down in a very muddled and confused way, so it's kind of impossible to know what he's talking about. I'm sorry, I'm not quickly, where is it? I think it must be earlier. Yeah, here we go. Is this it? Yeah, now here's a anyway, this is a picture. I know it's hard to see, but it's showing the human face. These are the two external eyes, and this, I believe, says mind. I know it's all blurry. And this is the third eye, there. And then this is the seven planes, and this represents Brahma. Brahma, the planes, the third eye, this is the mind, and then these are the external gross eyes. And there's a funny little comment, Dr. Ghani's head, with apologies for, I can't even read it, private. So it being private for showing it right. You'll probably think that. You know Dr. Ghani, a lot of you, big head. And so this, I mean, it looks like a crab, doesn't it? The two eyes sticking out like that. And one of the things Baba says, he talks about the very point at the center of the eye is, you see a light there. I mean, the gleam of light comes from it. And is it the iris is around it, which is dark. And around that is the white of the eye. And in the same way, God is at the very center of things, and the subtle sphere, subtle means subtle with mental, is dark, because opposites are next to each other. The opposites join. He gave this figure to show this. A, B, C, D, E, F, E, and then X, Y, is it Z here in Australia?
Yeah.
Z and A are closest to each other, even though they're opposites. And he said in this way, the opposites are next to each other. And in that same way, the subtle, because it's right next to the point of light, and thus it is the opposite, it is dark. And the subtle is the opposite to the gross, and thus the white of the eye is representing the gross. So the very structure of the eye mirrors or represents God, the subtle sphere around it, and the gross sphere around that. Are you following this? So this is the sort of thing he was explaining to these kids. I've never seen that given before, with the figure of Ghani about it, in the middle of it. And then from there, he starts going on to the world, the sun, and the moon. Okay, I'll read snippets as we get into it. See, the point of creation, the middle point, and the white and the black worlds. The white would be the gross world, and the black would be the subtle world. Subtle means the inner world, subtle and mental, around it, which has as their counterparts the domains of the subtle and the gross, and which correspond to the points of the eye, both the outer gross and the inner third eye. These were the topics we discussed yesterday. Okay. Why is the earth round? Here, I'm going to jump over this. He's going stepwise to his... it's like a whole argument is being developed here. What comes out of the point at the center, right, must be round, since the point itself is round. In one of our earlier talks, we observed that innumerable light globes emerge from this point. It follows then that these light globes must necessarily be round in shape, since the point from which they emanate has this shape. So at this stage in the discussion, we come to the topic of light globes, and we've explained why they are round in shape. Each of these light globes has its own shadow. That shadow means a world. So this is the light globe, and this is the shadow. So a world is like a wave. Remember, there's the ocean, there are waves, and there are drops. Some of you weren't here this morning, but we spoke a little bit about that. And he's given a couple of talks where he really explained this. And the wave has a bubble. There's a wave bubble, and each drop has a bubble. There's a drop bubble. And so a wave bubble is a world. And now he's explaining in this system of metaphors, a world is also the shadow of the light globe.
So if it's pink light globe, might be a pink world.
Pink world, yeah. Want to sort of swap? Let us take the case of one light globe as represented in this figure. Okay. Oh, there's more here. We saw earlier that wherever God is, Pokol or Akash is also. Pokol means hollowness. He's talked a lot about that. The gross sphere is essentially emptiness or hollowness. God is everywhere, but Pokol and Akash accompanies him. So the initial situation is this. Beneath the creator point is Pokol or hollowness.
So is that going to be like Shunyata?
That's what I'm wondering. We could talk, by the way, I forgot to mention, I wanted to say this morning too, next Friday morning, we're going to be doing the wrap-up on Buddhism. Buddhism took 2 weeks instead of 1 to finish up. We got up to the beginning of Mahayana next week on Friday morning, 10 to 12. We'll be talking about the Madhyamaka and Yogacara and later Buddhism up to about the year 800 or so. At which point, I expire. I don't go farther than that. But yeah, so that's a big question. I'm really interested in that question, actually, whether Buddhism was speaking about the same hollowness. Now, what happens? Onto this Pokol, or hollowness, the image or reflection of the world falls. In this world, it should be recollected, is a shadow of the light globe. As a shadow of the light globe is the faintest of faint light. Now, just to gloss that a little bit, this is the light globe here, and this is its shadow. Well, the shadow is not pure darkness. It's the faintest of faint light. There's a little bit of light there. So it can project a reflection, and that reflection falls in the emptiness or the pokol, right? Are you following this? It's like the emptiness is like a mirror. It's not even there, but it falls in it. And that reflection is reflected in this emptiness, and this image can receive the light of the light globe, and that's the sun. Did you ever hear that before? Let me say that again, if that makes sense. The sun is actually emptiness. There's a place we were just reading where Upasani Maharaj says the sun is black. Remember, John, we were doing that 2 weeks ago. It made me think of this. But the sun is actually, Baba must be talking about the derivation of the gross world from the subtle world. It must be something like that. I mean, it's not physically true. But the reflection, the earth, a world is the faintest of faint light, and that light falls into the emptiness, the pokol, the hollowness. It's hollow, not just empty, it's hollow. And that image is illuminated by the light from the light globe. And so illuminated, it becomes brilliant sun, and that light, in turn, goes back and illuminates the world. You follow this? I mean, it's a very strange idea here. And he said, just as a reflection, I think he means like in the late day, a reflection is much bigger, like your shadow is much, much bigger than you are. Similarly, the sun as a reflection of the earth appears to be much, much bigger than the earth is. So, is this making any kind of sense? So, I mean, he's really, he doesn't say this, but he must be talking about how the gross sphere derives from the subtle. It must be something like that, because we clearly found it earlier that these light globes become visible when you enter into the subtle domain. Well, it gets a lot wilder and crazier than this. This is only the beginning. Let's see. But since, let me see what this is. But since this shadow, image or reflection reflects the world, so that's the image is right there, or here it is, which is the sun. But as this image or reflection reflects the world, and since this shadow or world is the shadow of the light globe, the light of the light globe falls on the pokol or akash, which is to say, it falls in the image reflected there, and not on the shadow itself. Right? If the light of a lamp, say, falls on the shadow of the lamp, the shadow's gone. It's annihilated. So the world cannot directly receive the light of the light globe. It can only do so in a mediated way. In this case, through the image, its own image. And this pokol, or hollowness, in turn, throws light back on the world. In this way, the pokol, or hollowness, becomes the sun, and it throws light on the world again. And in the figure where the shadow has been identified with the world and the image within the pokol as the sun. Thus, the image of the world becomes the sun of the world. So our sun that we see up there is actually a reflection of the earth. The sun itself has nothing of the gross in it, but it is the light, the very faintest light, of the light globe. Okay. Consider the light of the sun and imagine if the faintest light of the light globe falling in the image within the pokol is so tremendously powerful, then what must be the real and original light? Then what must the real and original light of the Creator be? Now, one might well raise the question, why does not the world directly receive illumination from the light of the light globe itself? The reason can be explained thus. the world is the very shadow of the light globe. And hence, the light of the light globe cannot be received by it directly, but only through the medium of the sun, which is its own image reflected in the hollowness. Take the analogy of a lantern. When lighted, it never illumines its own shadow falling directly beneath itself. But when the mirror is placed before the lantern, the light of the lantern, when it falls on the mirror, will be thrown on the shadow too. So then he's summarizing, there are innumerable light globes. Consequently, there are innumerable worlds as shadows of the light globes. And there are innumerable suns. So now he goes on from this. In earlier talks, he said a lot about three worlds. He said there is actually one world, but it has three parts and is three worlds. And this earth is one of them. He says a good bit about them. He said in the second world, worlds A, B, and C, ours is A. In B, people are a good bit more intelligent than they are here on the earth. And on C, they're much more intelligent. On C, they can, they don't have to speak. They can communicate directly from mind to mind and stuff. But they don't have feeling or they don't have love in the same way. Anyway, here he talks about these three worlds. He's talked about them as coming out of the light globe. Now he gives a whole thing about the suns. This is some of the strangest stuff I've ever read. Let's see if it's here. Yeah. So the first world, nearest to the crater point, has one sun. The second world, next to the first, has two suns. And the third world has four suns. And this is all the seventh world, which has three subworlds. A is the earth in which we live. 2 has two suns, and the third has four suns. And Baba illustrated why this would be so. Let's see. And here's the figure which he gave for it. I mean, I'm just taking it as read that he's talking about something on the inner planes here. Because obviously there are not three Earths in close association with each other within the solar system, which of course Baba would know perfectly well. Now this is a little bit hard to see. Let me show you a better version of this somewhere. I think I have it at the end. Yeah. Here it is again. This was in the Meher message illustrating this. Okay, here's the light globe, right? The light globe nearest to the creator point. And here is A, world A, and one sun of the A part of the seventh world. So this is our earth and this is our sun. So this is the shadow of the light globe, and its image falls in the emptiness. That image in the emptiness is illuminated by the light of the light globe, which in turn comes back to illuminate this earth. That's what he's saying. Now, in the second world, it receives, this is the second sun, it receives the light of the light globe, which goes to here, to the second world, but it also reflects the light of the earth, which appears as a second sun. So this actually, Baba illustrated this too. I mean, this is wild and crazy stuff, but he actually had a light, a torch, or a lantern or something, and he had a system of mirrors. And by means of this, he showed the boys what he was talking about. And the third world receives, if I get this right, one sun is reflecting the light of the light globe. It's also reflecting
Two.
the two suns, and I forget where the fourth comes from. I'm getting mixed up at the moment.
Well, also from the top one.
From the top, yeah. That's
So it
right.
gets A reflects down onto C's sun,
Yes,
as well as B reflects A's and
right.
B. So
That's right.
Yeah.
All three of them are coming from there.
Yeah.
Oh,
So it actually has four suns.
Yeah.
So one sun of the A part of the seventh world, two suns, 2 and 1 of the B part of the seventh world, four suns, 4 and 1 of the C part of the seventh world.
all from the one light bulb.
All from one light bulb, yeah. Now, again, you start to say, what on earth could Baba possibly be talking about? I mean, I'm imagining in the gross sphere, these three planets are probably millions of light years away from each other. I don't think he's talking about it in a literalistic way. But there mu- Hmm?
The original light bulb, what's that?
You see, it seems Baba gave a creation account where out of the original Om point, innumerable light globes came.
It's the on point.
No, the light globe is emerged from the Om
Oh,
point.
okay.
And this is the one nearest to the,
To
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 the
the
created
point,
one.
yeah. Right, which is why this Earth is the spiritual center of the universe, and the hierarchy is here.
We're tied up with these other planets.
Yeah,
possibly.
there's an entanglement. Maybe this is quantum entanglement. So
Now,
I mean, I'm imagining these could be far away from each other in the gross sphere.
I've got one question for you.
Yeah.
When those three came up, it brought to mind something that had been said to me innumerable times before about how this planet
Yeah.
is the perfect balance of head and heart.
Yeah.
And you said one of them is more head and the other one is much more head. Could it be that one is more heart and one is more head? That was,
I've often wondered that,
yeah,
and he doesn't say anything like that here.
yeah.
But in the archives here at Avatar's Abode, Francis wrote out as a whole typed page that he got from Baba on that subject. And he says there's a very small number of planets where it's 90% heart and 10% head. It seems that the general problem is the other way. But there are a few like that. But he doesn't say that about these three planets. It's head. And these three planets, finally, when the A planet, which is Earth, eventually wears out, and he says it cools off, cools down, and it moves aside, and B occupies its position, and C occupies the position of B. And then there are a total of 7, he uses the word flanges. Have you ever heard the word flange used that way?
No.
It's like a range of items. Anyway, that's the word used. Maybe one of the Mandali popped in there, I don't know. But from this is the 7th projectile, or the 7th flange. And from the 6th, one of the planets moves into the C position, is what he said. And the Earth that has moved aside cools down and becomes a moon. So this is where the moons come from. And he has a whole thing about 7 moons also. He has a good bit about these 7 and what's to be found in them. So,
Does he say anything about how long it takes for the Earth to cool down and move?
no, he didn't give any numbers like that.
Or why it cools down.
I think that's
Right now, we're having global warming.
Yeah, I know he didn't really talk about that. Yeah. I mean, these are very short presentations, and again, this is a bunch of kids. But if you can imagine Baba up there, and the room is kind of dark, and he's got a torch, and he has mirrors, and the Mandi had placed them so that they could all see it. It'd be very vivid. Now, I mean, I asked myself, why on earth was this a topic that Baba wanted to explain to these kids? And again, I have to think something archetypal was going on with these kids. And that in 400 years, one of them will come back and be the new Sir Isaac Newton or Einstein or six-plane saint or something like that, illuminating these topics for humanity. And for some reason, they needed to know it.
Could it be related to a prism? No, prism and...
With the
Refraction
splitting
of
into
light.
multiple colors. Yeah. anyway, there are about two lectures where he's talking about this. And as you see, it's actually not just a sort of a random wandering into the solar system. He's actually talking about opposites and how the opposites come out of each other, and how the opposites originally came out as prana and akash out of the Om point. We were talking about that. I'll just say it because some people weren't here. Pran is energy, and akash is space, but it's hollowness. So they both emerge together as co-conditions of each other. In fact, there are one of these talks just a little bit before this. He gives he calls them proofs that space, pran, sometimes he'll call it movement. He'll use the term movement. And space or hollowness or akash or poko, that they were latent, they were inherent within the original ocean of God. He gives several proofs of this. And in one of them, he describes the structure of a wave. He doesn't use the word sine wave, but I would think of it. And it's like, it's an alternation of fullness and emptiness. Fullness and emptiness. Prana and akash, prana and akash. So, I think when we get scientists into the scene here, the very structure of the wave seems to me to be an expression of this prana and akash.
So particle versus wave.
Yeah. Now, in the later talks, any observations on the whole solar system? Yeah.
Oh, well.
Or what? Yeah.
Does pran mean breath? Doesn't it mean breath?
It is associated with breath in pranayama yoga because
because of the in and out.
Yeah, and
Well,
breath
the wave
is
is doing the
associated
same
with
thing, the in and
pran,
out.
within that kind of energy.
So the wave is doing the same thing.
Yeah, in and out. Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
So the crest of the wave is like, could be the pran and
Would be a
the trough
full-on
would be
wave.
the akash.
Yeah.
Yeah. He does
of course
explain
the
that-
water doesn't move, it's always just energy moving.
That's right. He actually makes that point that movement or pran is not the wave itself,
Right.
but it's inherent in it. It's latent in it. It manifests from it. And the two come together. A lot of you weren't, we were talking about Buddhism, we were talking about pratitya samutpada, a nice little mouthful, which is dependent arising. A fundamental Buddhist doctrine is that anything that emerges always comes with something else on which it depends. Nothing ever arises independently. It's maybe the most central doctrine that Buddha taught, it looks like. But Buddha was talking about phenomenology, experience, suffering, the cycle, the chain of experience, all that kind of thing. But it seems to me that the same principle might be applied to the creation story. That is to say, it begins with pran and akash, which co-arise. And he also says this is in some of the earlier talks, they co-arise and then clash. And with the clash, there's a flash of lightning, he gives that figure. And that's when the first jivatma comes into the picture. You know, jivatma, embodied soul. When the evolution begins, the soul first begins to experience when prana and akash meet and clash with the flash of lightning. He uses that description for it. So it appears that the creation story in God Speaks doesn't begin at the very beginning. Actually, before even any drop soul identified with anything, there was this separation of prana and akash, which then clashed. And that's where the whole thing began.
Is that like the gases that Baba talks about in God Speaks but doesn't go into detail?
Yeah, it makes me wonder. In a fuller exploration of this topic, I would bring to this infinite intelligence with thinking in the imagination. It strikes me that this earlier stuff with prana and akash belongs purely to the domain of the imagination. In fact, an infinite intelligence, Baba says that, in fact. And it's only when you think I don't know if you remember thinking the imagination, we had a couple of years ago. It's only when thinking the imagination happens that you get the beginning of the jivatma, the soul, the drop soul, comes into the picture and starts to experience. So it seems like there's stuff that happens before that, and it must be within the domain of the pure imagination, it seems to me. Baba doesn't talk about imagination and thinking the imagination to the boys. He had plenty of other things to occupy his 34 talks with. Now, in the later talks, the last series of 15 or so, let's see where I am, he starts to get into the planes. I'm just giving you a couple things here, obviously. And this is where he starts. This is actually a chart similar to what we have in God Speaks. I know it's a bit hard to see, but this is, what is it, stone, metal, vegetable, can't even read, human, animal, bird, animal, human. The poor fish didn't make the list here. And now it goes back up to here and it's first, second, third, fourth, fifth, and sixth. And but you might ask, what is this? Well, these are the asmans, or the skies. He uses the English word, the skies. And this is the fullest presentation of this topic that Baba ever gave that I know of. In fact, later on, he didn't try to explain it at all. There's nothing of it in Discourses or in God Speaks. But there is this, this is part of the whole landscape of the inner world. And this is an analogy that Baba gives right in this very Tiffin lecture. Yeah, Tiffin lecture, I'm mixing up books, this very talk that was. He gives the analogy of traveling from Ahmednagar to Bombay. Going by means, if you go by means of the train, you go by rail from railway station to railway station. If you get out, you're at a railway station. And that would be like the first plane or the second plane or the third plane or things like that. And the skies or the asmans are like the surrounding city. And the planes are connected with each other, and they're connected ultimately with the goal, which would be Bombay. But these cities are not connected with each other at all. So if you get off the planes into the skies, you can't go on from there because there's no line that leads you on to the next city. You have to somehow get onto the plane once more, and from there travel to the next plane.
What about a distinction between the worlds and the skies?
I don't remember where he ever talks about that. What do you mean about the worlds and the skies?
Well, there's train stations, but then if you get off at the train station, then as we were talking about before, there's the world of that plane, which is lit by the light bulb.
Yes.
But then the sky there seems to be a distinction between the world of the plane and the sky, or maybe there isn't.
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't really thought about that. They seem to be connected, the planes, the skies and the planes. And in fact, as you go farther on, they get very close to each other. This diagram doesn't really show it exactly the same way that the description does, but in the fourth plane, the sky and the plane are very close to each other. And on the fifth plane, they're very close. And on the sixth, they're almost one and the same. But in the earlier planes, they're much farther apart.
It sounds like it might be the same.
Yeah.
Because when you go through the planes consciously, and you experience the world of that plane,
Yeah.
or the sky.
Yes. He does say in one place, I remember this about the third plane, that from the third plane you can see the associated skies, but from those skies you can't see the plane. And he also says that if you're traveling under a master, under the guidance of a sadguru or a guru, a real guru, which I mean a realized master, the master lets you see the skies, but doesn't let you go there, so you don't get caught. But if you're not traveling with a master, you're caught. It's because it's so intoxicating and so wondrous.
So maybe Odysseus' journey, and there was that island of Circe.
Yeah.
So they were all travelling, but
Yeah.
Yes, yes, exactly. Yeah.
but there were certain places that
Yeah.
were very alluring.
Yeah, one of the first things in the Odyssey is the lotus eaters.
Yeah.
And that, I mean, if you interpret that as an account of the spiritual path, that might be a first plane samadhi or something. Because the lotus eaters are very nice, friendly people. And when they come there, they give you lotuses to eat, so you can join them. But if you do, you forget where you're going and just sit and eat lotuses. So that sounds like a samadhi.
Sounds like Australians.
Australians, you're lotus eaters?
According to Eric.
Okay. So, and he goes on to explain something about the skies of all associated with all 6 or 7 planes, and he even has names for them. In fact, let's see what that is. Is it here? Planes in the skies. Now here we have. So the first sky or asman is called the alam-e-waqtiya, the world of the moment. I spent a lot of time looking up these words, and they're all very interesting words in Sufism. The second sky is called, alam means a world. Our asman is called the alam-e-ruhani, the world of spirits. Ruh is a word for spirit in Arabic. The third sky or asman is called the alam-e-quds, or the pure world. The fourth sky or asman is called the alam-e-mahfuz, the protected world. Now, isn't that funny? Because that's precisely the world where you come into the greatest danger. So why it's the protected world, I don't know. Maybe the masters are very vigilant over the fourth plane or something like that. I don't know. Is anyone on the fourth plane could explain that? The fifth sky.
Oh, well, I didn't know, but
Jim?
I forgot.
I know, once you got to the fifth plane, all that fourth plane stuff doesn't matter anymore. The fifth plane, sky or asman, is called the alam-e-asrar. And this is related to the word seer. You know, I have a wonderful thing, a Sufi account of a lot of these terms. It's really worth bringing to bear on this. Seer means secret, the world of secrets.
Is there a dictionary of these terms?
It is. This thing is kind of that.
Yeah.
Kushairi is his name. It's really one of the great treatises of Sufism. It's very deep. You could spend 2 hours on each page. But a lot of this language comes up there. The sixth sky or asman is called the alam-e-janani. You know, Jane Janan, if you ever come to India when the Iranis are there, you're going to get a lot of Jani. the world of the oversoul, and the seventh sky or asman is called the Arsh Umuala, the throne of Allah. And I would really love to know more about this. I mean, I've looked up the words, but I actually sent this list to Carl, Carl Ernst, the Sufi scholar, and he said he had never seen this system anywhere. So I wish I knew where these terms came from. Did Baba just give them out there, or what is it? So, so this is all very Sufi sounding and Islamic sounding, the whole language background. Then he starts to go through them. The first sky or Asman has 3 divisions, as shown here. The figures, unfortunately, are extremely primitive. So, A, B, and C, first plane. I mean, that's looking sort of like, do you think that's the plane?
Let's see.
I think so, because he says when you reach the third sky or asman, it's virtually identical to the first plane. So the first part of the first, remember he's telling this to, what was the date of this? This is like December 29th or something like that. Yeah. Before, I want to read this first. This is the day before we started going into this. And this is where things were really starting to come apart there. Where it was on the 1st of January that the whole dam broke. And these boys were just weeping uncontrollably. So it was right on the verge of that. And he says, so here's what he said. On this juncture, Sri jot reference to the fact that if he gets the hooky, when we first found this word, we spent a long time trying to find out what hooky means, right? Sounds great, doesn't it? And we got all sorts of suggestions on it and finally found it. It's a Marathi word. And it's like the whim, or it's like whim, but it's like the master's hooky. If I get the hooky, I'll give you $1 million. If I get the hooky, I'll give you God realization. Something like that. And it turns out that Baba liked this word. We find it in the 1960s even. So I think it should really be a part of our spiritual vocabulary. I think it's great.
Playing hooky.
Playing hooky, yeah. Let's play hooky from creation. A few selected from among the boys of the ashram may at once get realization, be brought back for special duty. But for this to happen, the time must come, and along with the rising of the hooky. Delving into the subject further, Sri cited the example of Sri Krishna, who brought down 17 extra persons after realization, all of them outside the circle. Again, it sounds like these boys were not circle members. These are another category of people. I personally think that the Meher Ashram, Prem Ashram stuff was for the next 700 years until the next advent. That's my guess anyway. Of course, how could I know that? But, just talking like an ignorant donkey. Indeed, one of them was a boy of only 11 years of age. Let me see, Sri concluded, who will get the apple? Pahuata kanachya nasibat teahe. This is Marathi. Now we will see whose destiny it is. It all depends upon Prem, love. So leave all of this, have done with explanations and the like, and do only one thing, Prem. And I will do my part, not for 17 only, but for many as I like. I have that power. Have no doubt about that. So create and increase love. And what is the meaning of this Prem? It means one thing only, thinking of Sri and nothing else. And if you do so, I have decided that among those whom I wish down to consciousness again after realization, most will be boys. And so, all this spread of illusion, Aibadha Pasara, you will see it all. How many among the boys will become saints? Only just this morning I have told you this. The time is very near. And after bringing all of this to accomplishment, Shri will come out. The hooky must come. It is very difficult to bring this about, but once it comes, everything will be done automatically. To some, I will show God. Some, I will make one with God. Okay? So that's a hell of a statement. He would punctuate these talks with comments like that. So let's see. So now here's a little bit, here's the first plane. I think we're in the previous talk that he said, on the first plane, one can read the minds of others if he wishes and see things far off. There are some who, having advanced in the first plane, lacking the guidance of the Guru, experience a great nod, strong attachment for reading the mind of others. There are many such persons in the world even now. But what is this nod about, and why does it arise? It does so because those who exercise such powers experience an unimaginable pleasure in doing so. It is no ordinary thing, this reading the minds of others. Of course, these first plane persons can read the minds only of those who are physically near to them, not of those who are far off. They can see great distances, but cannot read the minds of those physically removed. And this turns out to be a difference. On the third plane, you can actually read the minds of anyone, anywhere in the world, apparently.
That's scary.
Yeah, I know. So for privacy, I mean, like, forget it. All these, the consolation is when I think about what I usually think about. I think they wouldn't bother. It's like, more of this shit. It's everywhere.
No, I'm saying that if I'm in the third plane, I wouldn't want to be reading minds or seeing any of that
Yeah,
crap on it.
I know that could be so. But on the other hand, he says, at least about the first plane, that there's a great pleasure in it, apparently. So I suppose, it's power. It's the allurement of power.
Facebook.
Facebook.
Yeah. Let's see.
I wouldn't work on Facebook. You have to be close.
That's right.
Neighbours.
Yes. Friends.
But remember, now this is characteristic of the end of these talks. He tended to end these talks by joining them to love. But remember, do not neglect Gyan, meditation, and the creating of love for Shri. He's openly saying, love me. Right? And they were wild about him by this time. In fact, don't bother with these other matters. All this is nothing. There is no use in your wasting your time over it. You just attend to your own duties, and the most important of your duties are these: to bear in mind the orders of Shri and to act strictly accordingly. This is the only essential thing required of you. Leave all else aside. For Paramatma is real, all else is a dream. But how to turn in order to see and become one with Paramatma? This is the question. So create LOVE. And then in the next day, we had already looked at, he's beginning to talk about the seven skies. So here's the first. So this is the skies associated with the first plane. The first part of the first sky retains its connection with the outer world. That is, when one who lives in that world gets turned, he sees the first part of this sky. So earlier talking about this, he said you start to see the light globes there. This is the same sky you see in your dreams. That is, that which you see in your dreams, the man who has been turned sees in the awake state. In short, the man in the first part of the first sky sees dreams in the awake state. Jagrut halat masvapna.
Daydreaming?
Yeah. consciously seeing dreams. In the second part of the first sky, one sees light globes. If the spiritual pilgrim has been turned by his guru, in that light globe he sees the real form of the guru, Guru Swarup. But those who have turned without the guru's help see the light globe only. There's a lot of difference, apparently, between those who travel with the guru and those who don't. And here's one of them. I'll just sort of say this because there's limited amount we're going to cover. When you're traveling without a master, let's suppose you get to the second plane and you then die. You fall back to the beginning. And in your next lifetime, you have to do it over again. You have to recapitulate your progress. The opportunity does come for you to do it again. You get openings where you can do it a second time, but you have to recapitulate your progress. And that goes on happening all the way up to the fifth plane. But if you're traveling with a master, you don't. You come back where you were. You don't lose progress. He uses the term yogi brashta for this, and you could find this in the discourses in reference to someone on the fourth plane who falls down to stone state. But here he uses it rather for this experience of losing your progress and falling back down at the time of death. So when you're traveling without a master, you have to keep recapitulating what you did last time.
So Mani has a story